a new high for 2009, a fresh one-year high, in fact, for the Aussie share market.
Right, it was a great session for the Australian share market. We've now seen the Aussie market rise 30% in the year to date and up a massive 50% from the lows that we saw in March. Today, it was all about those job numbers. You can see that at 11:30, those job numbers were released, and that's where most of the action on the Australian market happened. If I bring up a market map, it will just show you where most of the gains came from, and you can see that big green block there. They're the big four banks. That's where the support on the market came from. We saw National Australia Bank and ANZ really lead the gains. Those two banks came out during the session to say that they were going to raise their variable rates by 1/4%, and Commonwealth Bank came out after the bell. The National Australia Bank was up by 4.4%. ANZ managed to gain 3.7%. Now, Westpac, after that New Zealand court ruling, that tax ruling, which said that Westpac would need to pay 961 million New Zealand dollars, Westpac actually started off the session in negative territory, but by the end of the session, it was actually up by 3.1%. The retailers also did extremely well. Those job numbers encouraging expectations that more people would be out there spending. So Harvey Norman up by 4.7%. Billabong also rose by 3.6%. Now, we also saw a record gold price overnight, but the gold miners were a little bit overlooked after some stellar gains this week. Lihir Gold managed to gain 1%, but Newcrest Mining actually finishing the session flat. We also saw base metals mostly higher overnight. BHP Billiton, Rio Tinto, both up 0.9%. So I guess the question is, were there any stocks or any sectors which actually lost ground today? The telecom sector was the one sector which actually finished in negative ground. Telecoms is obviously a defensive area, and defensive sectors did underperform. We also saw the healthcare and consumer staples area underperforming, as did the industrial as well as the property sectors. But altogether, a very good day on the Australian share market.
And SEEK outperformance there too on the back of those jobs numbers.
Those job numbers were great news for SEEK. Now, SEEK is the biggest internet site for job ads, so it rose a massive 8.2%. We also saw media companies doing well. Fairfax up by 6.7%. It helped that in the morning Credit Suisse upgraded that media sector, rating Fairfax as well as APN Media and SEEK to an outperform. So all three stocks doing very well. APN Media also up by 3.9%. So those job numbers also stirring hopes that perhaps advertising revenue would once again start to come in terms of the media stocks. So media stocks having a pretty good session today.
Yeah, sure did. And of course, after market close, we've got that news from Babcock and Brown Infrastructure announcing a recapitalisation plan that's been long awaited for. What does this mean for investors?
I guess it's good news for investors. Babcock and Brown Infrastructure has had this funding cloud hanging over its head for a while. As of the 30th of June this year, it had $8.8 billion worth of debt, which gives it a gearing ratio of about 98%. Now, some of that debt was due up fairly soon, $300 million of that due in February. So I guess Babcock and Brown Infrastructure was really looking for a solution to this debt. Now, it's announced a $1.8 billion recapitalisation plan. Now, as part of that plan, they're also going to change their name to Prime Infrastructure and Management. They're also going to internalise management. Now, in terms of what money they're going to raise, $1.5 billion will be through an equity raising, and then $295 million will come from Brookfield for the sale of some assets. So if we firstly have a look at that $1.5 billion capital raising that they're looking at, $625 million will be through a cornerstone investor. It will be to Brookfield. Then $625 million will be through to institutional investors. So that in the end will form about 70% of Babcock and Brown Infrastructure's capital. So that cornerstone investor and the institutional investors. And then there'll be another share purchase plan for retail investors, hoping to raise $250 million. It is underwritten. We know that they've been trying to sell assets as well. So they have sold their 50% stake in Dalrymple Bay as well as the PD Ports to Brookfield. Now, they've done it for a nominal sum, altogether $295 million. They'll be doing it through a convertible note issue as well, which is a little bit strange. But PD Ports was a concern because there's $200 million worth of debt associated with that particular asset, and Brookfield will take on that $200 million worth of debt. If we have a look at Babcock Badcock and Brown Infrastructure shares, they have been underperforming in 2009. In fact, in the year to date, shares are down by about 52%. This is a massive capital raising. Hopefully it will get rid of some of their debt problems, but they're losing some of their star assets in this deal as well.
Just quickly, Julia, I mean, you've already touched on this, but obviously after market close, we got the last two of the big four banks following on from the ANZ and NAB and raising their interest rates on their standard variable home loans by 25 basis points. So all following what the Reserve Bank did in that official move on Tuesday. What does this mean for the banking sector? We did see it do very well today.
Banking sector doing extremely well today, and we saw it on the back of those job numbers. If we have a look at those job numbers, they were much better than expected. In September, we saw 40,600 jobs being added on, and I guess that means that if there's more people in work, there's more of a demand for loans as well. So that was good news for the bank, really boosting that banking sector up higher. Now, the fact that they've been able to pass on that rate hike to consumers through their variable loan rates is a positive as well for investors. So I guess investors in the banks pretty happy with their performance. I mean, extremely strong gains today. Basically, the banks gaining between 3 to 4.5%, which is virtually unheard of in a single day.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Juliet, as always, we do appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bridie.